the studio for another edition of Volcanoes TV. For Jake Strauss to my right, I'm Brandon Chin, and here we are, the media team, breaking down the first half of the 2014 season for the Salem-Keizer Volcanoes. Jake, it seems like it was just yesterday that it was June 13th, and the Salem-Keizer Volcanoes were welcoming in the Vancouver Canadians to open up play right here at Volcano Stadium. But time has flown by, and now we are here wrapping up the first half, which finished just a few days ago. Ahead on Volcanoes TV, we'll give you the cold hard facts, show you where the Volcanoes finished in the first half. We'll talk about some interesting news and notes that are kind of behind the scenes you may not have seen, some surprising players to highlight. We'll give you all the transactions that went down for the Volcanoes, and we'll also look at a couple key trends, one including the comebacks that the Volcanoes had and a top 5 that our very own Jake Strauss has put together for us. So stay tuned, a lot to get to, but first, Jake, let's just look at the Volcanoes. They finished 18-20 in the first half of the season, good enough for 3rd in the South Division, 5th overall in the Northwest League. And this was a team that had 15 returning players coming in at the beginning of the season. Expectations were high, maybe underachieved just a little bit, but it was still a very exciting ride in this first half of the season. Well, one thing that made it exciting, Jake, the Cardiac Craters, they have the name, they developed the name, and it has stuck, possibly because coming back was just almost second-hand nature for them as the season progressed.
The Comeback Craters, it was certainly a nickname that did stick with this team, not just in the press box, but I heard some fans calling them that too. And as you were saying, it's because they were just continuing to come back almost every game, it seems like, at the beginning of the season. And it's something that we'll get into more later. We'll give you that top 5 comebacks of the year, but it's something they were able to consistently do. You felt like this team was never out of a game.
Now you look at the abilities to come back. We will touch on that top 5. We were going through those games earlier. A lot of exhilarating games for the Volcanoes this season, and maybe some exhilarating games that didn't go their way. You look at the comeback wins, but you can also just look at the close games as a whole. 15 one-run games this season for the Volcanoes thus far through the first 38 games. The first half of the season, they went 10-5 in games separated by just 1 run with their opponent. 2-run games, 11 games, and they went 3-8 in those. And then you look at the games which gave us bonus baseball, extended past the 9th inning, and 5 extra inning games in the first half of the season. They had a winning record, went 3-2, but boy were there some crazy extra inning games, including one against Eugene over at PK Park, which went 14 innings and tied the franchise record for longest game played in terms of innings. We've talked about going into the late inning games. Now how about earlier in the game? And let's take a look, Jake, now at some of those trends early in the game with the Salem-Keizer Volcanoes.
Something the Volcanoes really struggle with this season is the first inning, the beginning of those games. The Volcanoes gave up 41 runs in the first inning. And Brandon, you compare that to the 6th inning where they gave up 30 runs. It's the second most runs they gave up. That's an 11-run difference right there, and that's really huge if you look at 41-30. So they gave up so many runs in the first inning. They were falling behind early. And that was really a big problem for them. That's what led to so many comeback wins. But if they were able to just keep them off the board early in the game, they wouldn't have so much work to do later in the game. And they probably have a lot more victories under their belt at this point.
And it really was one of those situations where they were unable to really harness that momentum and continue it on. They have a walk-off win the night before, and then they come out and get outscored by 2, 3, sometimes even 4 or 5 runs in that first inning. Just very difficult to get any sort of momentum when you're falling behind that early in the game. Let's take a look at one other trend for the Volcanoes, and that was the bullpen blues. Now, you look at the start of the season, and the bullpen was really the key part. It was the staple of the pitching staff and possibly the staple of the Volcanoes' early success in the first half of the season. They started the year in June 6-4 with a 2.98 ERA combined in relief. They had 2 opportunities for a save, and they converted both of them. Now, those numbers pretty impressive in June, but July was a completely different month for that bullpen. In relief, their record was 3-7 with a 7.13 earned run average. They had 15 opportunities for a save and converted just 6, so 9 blown saves there. And you look at the ERA, 7.13, 7 losses with only 3 wins and 65 2/3 innings pitched. So the bullpen did not get the job done in July as opposed to their success that they had in June.
And Brandon, it's just so interesting when you look at it. They were so strong in June, that bullpen, and then July they just fall apart. In June, really, they were the best part. They were the shining star of the Volcanoes team. The starter would come out of the game, and we'd feel so confident as fans knowing that the bullpen would come in, they would secure the victory, or they would keep that lead short so the Volcanoes could come back like they did so often. However, in July, they just fell apart, and really what we need to look for going forward is them to get back in that groove that they were in June and keep things going in the second half.
And because of those numbers in July, the bullpen's overall numbers for the first half of the season really don't do them justice. An excellent month of June, but they finished up the first half with a 9-12 record and a 4.79 earned run average. So the numbers are not where Gary Davenport, the manager for the Volcanoes, would like them to be. And you hope come second half the Volcanoes can really get back to that June form when you look over to the bullpen. Well, we've talked about trends for the Volcanoes so far in 2014, and we were just talking about that Volcanoes bullpen. Now let's shift over and talk about some surprising players for the Volcanoes this season, and no better place to start than with one of the key starters for their five-man rotation.
Yeah, let's start talking about Mr. Jose Reyes, somebody you guys did not know very much about coming into the season. He's been absolutely fantastic so far. He struggled just a little bit early on, but he's really been an innings eater for the Volcanoes so far. He's helped the bullpen out by taking away some of their innings. He's been averaging over 6 innings in his starts so far this season, which is quite a lot here in Single A. His opponents are hitting a mere 194 off of him, which is just a terrible average, something you would not want as a hitter, and he's keeping hitters to that consistently throughout the season. And in his last start, let's highlight that last start, he went 8 innings, shutout baseball, only 1 hit. So he's carrying some momentum into the second half, and it's going to be exciting to see if he can continue the surprising season so far.
You look at a guy like Jose Reyes, he's the number 2 starter in the Volcanoes rotation. Let's go one spot deeper. Let's go to the third man in the 5-man starting rotation for the Volcanoes, Nick Gonzalez, another surprising player for these Volcanoes. The left-hander from the University of South Florida got the job done for manager Gary Davenport and pitching coach Matt Yorkin. A 1-2 record with a 2.37 earned run average through the first half of the season. Now get this, 1-2, but the record really doesn't do him justice. Mr. No Decision should be his name, and we'll take you through a couple of these numbers. Has had a lot of tough luck no decisions. 6 innings, only 1 earned run against Hillsborough. He got a no decision. 5 innings, 1 earned run against Everett, also no decision. And then 5 2/3 innings of no runs against Hillsborough once again. And then 5 innings, no earned runs against Boise. Both of those coming in no decision. So if you look at those numbers, over 20 innings and only 2 earned runs, and he still gets a no decision in those 4 starts.
Well, being Mr. No Decision's a little bit better than being Mr. Tough Luck Loser. However, it's pretty unbelievable to have a 2.37 ERA as a starting pitcher, and halfway through the season, just 1 win under your name. So hopefully the Volcanoes offense can back up Gonzalez just a little bit more in the second half.
And as you mentioned, the 2.37 earned run average, very good. He's got a 1-2 record, 38 innings pitched, only 11 walks. So does a really good job of containing the strike zone and has great command with all of his pitches. The fastball, the big loopy breaking ball from the left-hander has been very effective. You mentioned the offense perhaps needing to step up a little bit when he's in there. Also the defense, as he's given up 19 runs on the season, only 10 of them earned. So the defense has allowed for 9 unearned runs to cross, part of the reason why he has had all of those no decisions. And for the Volcanoes and Nick Gonzalez, he is another surprise player out of the rotation so far in the first half of the season. Shifting over to the offensive side now, one guy who has really caught the attention of us, manager Gary Davenport, and most of the fans that have been on hand here for the first part of the season, Will Callaway, a guy that went to Appalachian State, a 37th round pick in 2013. Yes, you heard that right, 37th round, and he's being discussed here on Volcanoes TV. Started the season 4 for his first 23 at the plate. A guy who wasn't playing very often and was really forced into duty with the injury to Christian Arroyo as he was out for much of the first couple of weeks of the season. So Will Callaway was getting at bats that way. And then one game, June 23rd, went 4 for 4 with 2 doubles and drove in 3 runs. And Jake, something just seemed to click. Since then, June 23rd to July 16th, he was boy wonder. Will Callaway, the man on fire, 34 for 93 at the plate. That's a 365 average. And oh, by the way, during that time, he also featured a 16-game hit streak, which served as the league high at that time. So Will Callaway, one of those guys, literally came out of nowhere, started 4 for his first 23, and ended up hitting .313 with 11 doubles, top 5 in the Northwest League, 2 home runs, and 18 runs batted in.
And Brandon, Will Callaway is the perfect guy to have here as a surprising player. I remember that day so perfectly, June 23rd, when he went 4 for 4. I was thinking, who is this guy who just got 4 hits? And I remember we chose him as player of the game for a reason. And I was thinking, okay, so some guy comes up, he has an amazing game. We'll probably not hear much about him from here on out, but that's been the guy that we have talked about more than anyone probably in the past month. And it all started on that one day. Definitely a surprising player.
And of course, you mentioned player of the game. He was tweeted at. As we want to hear your thoughts on every Volcanoes win for a player of the game, tweet at us at S_K_Volcanoes. And we want to hear your thoughts on who the player of the game should be. I remember that game, it was a toss-up. Was it Drew Leanhouse, who went 6 dominant innings to get his first win of the season? Or was it Will Callaway, who broke out of his early season slump and went 4 for 4? Well, his father, Jim Callaway, decided to take it into his own hands. He tweeted at us, and because of that, we gave Will Callaway, rightfully so, the player of the game. So you have say at home. Just send us a tweet, S_K_Volcanoes, and we want to hear your thoughts for McDonald's player of the game.
Now we've talked about surprise players. Let's take a step aside and let's talk about some surprise statistics, some things that fans at home might not know by just watching the games. We got a few pretty interesting facts for you here. Let's start it off with the shutouts. And when I say shutouts, I mean every single team in the Northwest League has been shut out at this point in the season, besides your Salem-Keizer Volcanoes. We are the lone team who has scored at least 1 run in every single game to this point.
Yeah, pretty impressive stuff there. Let's get to something maybe not so impressive. Another interesting note from the first half of the season. It took the Salem-Keizer starting rotation on the mound until their 11th game to get their first win of the season. 11 games. It wasn't until the 3rd time around the rotation, Drew Leanhouse, and the game, Jake, that actually we were just talking about in the Will Callaway 4 for 4. Drew Leanhouse 6 dominant innings to pick up the first win for him, but also for the entire starting rotation, and 11 games for the starting rotation to notch their first win.
As you were just saying, it's unbelievable that it would take that long for a starting pitcher to get a win. They're usually the pitchers that find the wins compared to the bullpen. Another surprising fact for the Volcanoes in the first half of the season is their issue with the 500 mark, getting that winning percentage of exactly 500. They played 15 games, which alone is surprising enough. 15 games while 1 below 500, meaning that's 15 chances to become a 500 team if they win. However, in those 15 games, Brandon, they went 3-12. They won 3 out of those 15 games, which in my eyes means they really struggled to get it done under pressure. It's something that we hope they don't have to deal with in the second half. Maybe they can just jump out ahead, keep above 500 winning percentage, and they won't even have to deal with that. But 3-12 in those 15 games, pretty unbelievable fact right there.
Well, you talk about 15 games played with a chance to get to 500. It seemed like the Volcanoes were flirting with the 500 mark all season long in the first half, and boy, was she a tease looking at those types of numbers. Something that you hope can get corrected in the second half. Well, something also intriguing for the first half, the idea of the draft pick. 2014 draft picks, none of them were on the roster to open the season. We mentioned it. 15 returning players came to the Volcanoes on the opening day roster, but you figured they'd trickle in. Well, not so much early on, as the Volcanoes only played the first half with 3 2014 draft picks. Jared Deacon was the first to join the crew. He was a 33rd round pick out of Cal State Fullerton University, a catcher. Skylar Ewing was second. He joined a little bit later, a 6th round pick in the 2014 draft out of Rice. And then, of course, Seth Harrison, who just joined the team at the very end of the first half of the 2014 season, a 7th round pick out of Louisiana Lafayette. So, Jake, only 3 draft picks from 2014 on this roster, and you look at other teams like Hillsborough, like Eugene, all have double digits at least of 2014 picks. So still a very experienced, a very unique group for the Volcanoes in the first half of the season.
And you have to be happy as a Volcanoes fan to just see 3 draft picks at this point. Brandon, I remember early on we were checking the websites, we were looking and thinking our research must be wrong, but the Giants took about 2 or so weeks to sign any of the players that they got in the 2014 draft. Meanwhile, other teams had already signed about 80% of those players. So something was weird out of the gates, and it seems like the Giants just took a little bit extra time to get those guys signed, which means it might be a little more lag time before we actually see them here on this Volcano squad.
And something to watch out for in the second half is how the 2014 draft picks develop. We'll highlight one guy because of a local twist. Dylan Davis from Oregon State University. He is signed with the San Francisco Giants, signed on the very last day to sign draft picks. So he could be a guy. Stay tuned, listen in, because it's a guy that could be walking into the locker room for the Volcanoes here in the next couple of weeks.
So now it's that time that hopefully you've all been waiting for. We're going to give you the top 5 come-from-behind wins in the 2014 season for your Salem-Keizer Volcanoes. Let's start it off at number 5. On July 14th in Everett, the Volcanoes found themselves down 2-0 and down 4-3 at different points in the game before Sam Mendy in the top of the 10th inning hit a 2-run home run and secured the win for the Volcanoes. And Brandon, that was really Sam Mendy's welcome to the team right there.
That it was. Number four, looking at a night where the Cardiac Crater name kind of came to life the day after they came from behind 8-1 to beat Vancouver. Very next night, 8th inning, down 3-1, and the Cardiac Craters did it again. Craig Massoni, 2-run home run to left field just over the top of the Coors Light sign. A 2-run bomb ties the game at 3. Couple of batters later, with 2 outs, Will Callaway doubles to dead center field over the head of the center fielder, and then Fernando Pujadas, the very next hitter, squeaks a ground ball just inside the third base line, and it goes down the left field line. An RBI double. The Volcanoes come all the way back in the 8th inning. A 3-run rally. They are leading 4-3, and they win that game by the very same score.
Number 3 in our countdown takes us back to the beginning of the year, the Volcanoes' first road trip of the season. It took them to Hillsboro, where ace Drew Lienhouse got the start. You really expected good things from him, however, he went 1/3 of an inning. He didn't make it out of the first, Brandon, and he gave up 5 runs. Things were not looking good for the Volcanoes. However, they were able to scratch back, claw their way back, and they won 8-6. In large part because of Cameron McVeigh, someone you really wouldn't expect to be the player of the game, but he came in relief after Drew Lienhouse lasted 1/3 of an inning. He pitched 3.2 innings, 7 strikeouts, no hits. So he really kept the Volcanoes in that game and allowed them to have that comeback after being down 5-0 in the first.
Very nice job by Cameron McVeigh in that performance to keep the team in the game. We're looking at the top 5 come from behind victories for the Volcanoes in the first half of the season, and we are down to number 2. And look no further than Shiloh McCall. We'll fast forward all the way to the 9th inning. Volcanoes trail by 2, 4-2, down to their final out. 2 runners on base. Shiloh McCall to the plate, and he launches a towering, sky-scraping fly ball over the left field wall into the berm on Homer Hill in left field. A 3-run homer. The Volcanoes won 5-4, and they won the game. They won the series, as it was the 5th and final game of the series. It was tied at 2 wins apiece. Shiloh McCall literally lifts the Volcanoes to a huge come-from-behind victory, and that walk-off 3-run home run is worthy of our top 5 list at number 2.
That takes us to number 1 on our top 5 come-from-behind wins this season. And Brandon, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, that 8-1 come-from-behind win against Vancouver. That takes our number 1 spot, and let's talk a little bit about that. That 8-1 win, or 8-1 come-from-behind win, was the largest come-from-behind win in franchise history, overcoming that 7-run deficit. And they did it in the bottom of the 7th inning by scoring 6 runs, 5 hits, 2 walks, and a couple of Vancouver wild pitches pushed across those 6 runs, made the score 8-7 going into the top of the 8th. Where Vancouver was able to come across the plate one more time, making the score 9-7. But the Volcanoes responded in the bottom of the 8th, scoring 2 runs off of a couple more wild pitches from Vancouver and a few more Volcanoes hits. The score was 9-9 going into extra innings, and it stayed that way until the 12th inning, where T. Relaford led off with a walk. Craig Masoni came to the plate, someone who we've already mentioned in this being a hero with that 2-run home run earlier in the countdown. He comes to the plate and lines the ball down the right field line for a game-winning walk-off double, scoring T. Relaford and securing the Volcanoes' first win of the season. It was looking like they were going to be down maybe 0-4, possibly get swept in a 5-game series by Vancouver. Instead, they take that win. That 7-run deficit is overcome. And Brandon, it was absolutely spectacular. People were going crazy. Those who were left in the audience, they were going crazy. And what a way to get your first win and land number 1 on the top come-from-behind win this season for the Volcanoes.
And it was number 1. It was a very exhilarating win, and we were able to catch up with Craig Masoni after that game to hear his thoughts on the walk-off hero and just getting the first win of the season for the Volcanoes.
Man, it was awesome. Obviously the weekend didn't go the way we planned, and we were down for a little while today, and it would have been really easy to quit. And just really proud of the team and the way we battled back. And obviously the last hit was just kind of the release, and it felt great, man.
So the first half is complete, and now we have that all in the rearview mirror. We look ahead now to the second half of the season, and we're talking playoffs. 18-20 in the first half. You saw what the Volcanoes did to get that 18-20 record, perhaps underachieved slightly. But now playoffs on the line, and their time is running out. With each day that will go by is one day less that the Volcanoes have to try and seize an automatic spot in the playoffs. Jake, you've been here. You've seen what's happened. What do the Volcanoes have to do to get over that hump, get past 500, and get into the playoffs?
Well, the Volcanoes certainly have their eyes set on those playoffs. And Brandon, we've talked about it earlier, but it all comes down to that first inning, the beginning of those games. The Volcanoes have proved already they can come back. They can score in those late innings, but we've seen it many times. Sometimes those runs in those late innings aren't enough just because of how much they've given up at the beginning. So what the Volcanoes really need to do, they need to come into these games a little bit more focused, a little bit more ready to jump ahead instead of falling behind. And if they're able to do that, I think we're going to see a lot more victories for the Volcanoes. And Brandon, they've also had a few other issues of late. In June, they were so great out of the bullpen, but things have not been going well, and you touched on that earlier. What do the Volcanoes need to do in that bullpen to turn things around and help them get to the playoffs in the second half?
When you look at the bullpen, a unit that finished 9-12 with a 4.79 earned run average, and you don't panic, regardless of their July numbers, because you look at what they did in June. They were a staple of that rotation of the pitching staff as a whole. 6-4, an ERA under 3 at 2.98, and they had to work a lot more. 81 2/3 innings pitched. July was not as good, but if you're this team, it's a new slate. You clean all the slates, you clean the record, you clean your personal stats if they were unsuccessful, and you just get ready to roll here. The bullpen, hopefully you can get back to their June form. But you touched on it, the beginning of the games are key for the Volcanoes. You must start better off from an offensive standpoint, and the end of the game is going to be key for the Volcanoes. The bullpen has to hold the lead of the offense, and the starting pitcher will hopefully be working to get. You put that all together. Hopefully at the end of this year, that spells Volcanoes baseball as we make this push to the playoffs here as the second half of the season starts now. Well, here you were with us. We wrapped up the first half of the season. It's all in the rearview mirror. We look ahead now. Jake Strauss to my right. I'm Brandon Chin, and you have been watching another edition of Volcanoes TV.